Hundreds of bright stars adorned the night sky, and the moon, occasionally peeking from under the cloud cover, illuminated the path to the peaceful town. The only cars that occasionally flashed on the road turned the corner and immediately turned off their headlights, blending into the shadows. However, all of this mattered little to me, a skinny 25-year-old sociophobe, spending my days in a closed apartment, rarely venturing outside. Sometimes, relatives would persuade me to leave my reclusion. Sometimes the groceries in the fridge would run out, forcing me to step out. But most often, it was the annoying grumbling of grandmothers under my window that disturbed my peace. By the way, about my window, that half-rotten wooden frame with glass was right in front of my bed, about half a meter away. If someone walked by it, their shadow would pass right over my bed, and if I accidentally didn't close my eyes, it could scare me quite a bit. Moreover, my bed was pressed against the wall, so I usually tried to stare at the ceiling or the wall. And one more important detail, I live on the ground floor, so perhaps it's not surprising that there's some protection against theft in front of my window, an iron grille, partially rusty and peeling off its white paint. It probably wouldn't hold back a serious thief, but it still creates some illusion of security. So, I've given you the main details, and now it's time to move on to what makes my blood run cold. It started last month. Insomnia suddenly came over me. I visited numerous doctors in my city, spending my last money on sleeping pills, with hard-to-pronounce names and even aromatic herbs that were said to promote instant sleep. But none of it worked, and I kept falling asleep only towards morning, around 4 o'clock. Before, to cope with insomnia, I simply counted the stars visible through the window. I counted about 30 celestial bodies. At least that many were visible from my position. In the end, I simply accepted my unpleasant fate and stopped trying to get rid of insomnia. After all, what's the big deal? I don't work. I don't have a girlfriend, no pets either. My life consists of small circles, my computer, where I spend my time immersed in games or endlessly scrolling through social media. It would seem insomnia, and that's all. And what is all this description hinting at? Doesn't it clutter the memory? I won't deny that it bothers me. Somehow, it seems to me that by describing all of this, it will be much easier for me. By the way, in about 2 weeks, if not sooner, another hitch appeared him. Just him. Now it begins, what I was talking about a few minutes ago. What makes my blood run cold? He comes every night, exactly at 1 o'clock in the morning. Precisely appears. No sounds of footsteps, no creaking, no other signs of approach. His arrival can only be guessed by 2 things: heavy, wheezing breathing and knocking. Knocking on the window. His bony finger slowly, and not very strongly, taps on my outdated window, producing that maddening sound. The outlines of his face are not visible. The hood conceals the details, and the pale light of the street lamp only hints at his opacity and the fact that he is there, outside, in front of the window. His first appearance triggered a wave-like reaction in me. At first, shock and bewilderment. I didn't even know how to behave. Then the desire to go out and chase him away crept in, teach him some manners. But you know why I didn't do that? Because right after the desire came the main feeling: fear. I huddled in my bed, looking at the nocturnal visitor. My heart seemed to start beating only at the moments of his knocks, as if creating an eerie duet. I was afraid to even make the slightest movement, and holding my breath, watched intently as his long finger with unnatural bends tapped on the window. A hazy, misty veil appeared on the glass, roughly where his face would be. It seemed to me that he was attentively observing me and sensing my fear. The next night was illuminated by the brightly shining moon, and when he appeared again, I managed to better discern the contours of his face. A horrifying smile, behind which lay a row of sharp yellow teeth, the absence of lips and a nose. And, of course, the eyes. Eyes in which you see your soul, in the most literal sense of the word, tiny pearls in small eye sockets, stared at me with an unwavering steel gaze. Throughout the time he looked at me, not a single eye blinked. That face was etched into my memory for a long time. Even now, as I write these lines, it feels like if I focus, I can hear that knocking again, along with the heavy wheezing breath. And if I look out the window, I'll see that creature again, but no longer behind the glass, but reflected behind me. This creature visited me for a week. Every time he appeared, I was overcome with terror. On the third night, I decided to turn away from the window and listen intently as the guest started knocking again. He knocked more intensely and aggressively, as if he was annoyed by the fact that I was no longer paying attention to him. I couldn't hold out for more than 10 minutes. Fear took over. I turned to the window and, trying not to meet the creature's gaze, began to examine the window frame. I don't remember falling asleep. Memories became mixed up, and I could hardly recall the endings of any of the nights spent face to face with this nocturnal visitor. It's hard to explain, and why bother? Everything is already quite clear. Besides, by the fifth night, I realized that he was waiting for me to turn and watch, as his twisted finger tapped on the window, making that unsettling sound. And now, another sleepless night. It was almost 1 o'clock. I firmly resolved to boycott this nighttime guest who made me curl up in bed every night and pray for it all to end. Wrapped in a blanket, I turned my face to the wall and waited for his arrival. And then, the first knock came quiet, as if hinting, "I'm here, pay attention." Then came another knock, more aggressive. "Are you annoyed?" I asked him in my thoughts. In response, a loud thud resounded. By the way, as soon as the sound started spreading, I noticed that a strange smell of decay was filling the room, as if something had been lying in one place for a long time and had turned into a rotten, shapeless mass, emitting that repulsive aroma. In contrast, the knocking resonated in my head, bouncing off my mind and returning, like a ball, making me flinch and swallow the lumps stuck in my throat. I was afraid the glass wouldn't withstand the blows, and initially, I was ready to turn towards the window, but my muscles, as if having taken control of their own accord, refused to listen to me. And intuition was firmly warning, "Don't do it, buddy, better not." I decided to heed the advice of my body and began to listen carefully to the knocks, which were becoming more aggressive, breaking the silence in the room. Well, of course, calling it silence would be an exaggeration. The creature's heavy breathing disrupted it much more often than the sounds of knocking. And as soon as the guest disappeared and the sounds subsided, sleep captured me in its embrace, carrying me into oblivion. I did it, flashed through my thoughts, before consciousness faded under the rule of Morpheus. I woke up at noon, my head aching and a dry sensation in my mouth. If I had the money, I would have left this place long ago. Swearing at everything, I got out of bed with heavy eyelids and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. As soon as the glass of desired liquid was in my hands, half of it disappeared instantly, and my eyes began to survey the surroundings. Before my eyes, the events of the previous night flashed back. That terrible fear that had seized me then returned, piercing through my body. Doubts retreated. Deciding to contemplate a plan of action, I made the decision to spend the next night at the computer and headed to my room, where it all began. When the computer was within arm's reach, my gaze fell to the floor in front of the window. A scream got caught in my throat, and the glass of water slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. Now the source of the mysterious, nauseating smell of decay became clear. Right in front of my window were traces of dirty footprints, as if someone had been standing there right by my bed. Oh God, what if I had turned around that night? At that period of my life, I was living in an old house being built just after the war. It was particularly notable for the fact that it had been built by German prisoners, and this was a few years after the end of hostilities. This house was small in size, with only 2 entrances and only 3 floors. Its entire construction was the epitome of conscientiousness, and had it not been for the indifference of the communal workers, it would have continued in excellent condition to this day. There is also a basement in our house, which is a real sophistication, especially from a modern perspective. Within this subterranean space, of which I shall speak more fully hereafter, each of the 18 flats possesses its own separate room. Our basement had the unpleasant feature of periodically turning into a kind of swamp, becoming a mire that emitted such disgusting odors that it was unbearable to even walk past it, let alone try to enter it. Utility workers regularly attempted to remedy the problem, and as a result, the odors occasionally disappeared. Curiously, however, when asked about this by the residents of the house, none of them had ever seen these very utility workers. Nevertheless, the work was being done. Another unique feature of our basement was the presence of 19 rooms in it, not including the corridor. It was a mystery why the German builders added 1 more extra room, depriving 2 neighboring rooms of space. The door to this extra room, it should be said, was strong. Iron, 2 fingers thick, covered with rust in places, it slammed with force, creating sounds that caused shivers. This strange behavior of the door made it difficult to explain. After all, how could there be such a strong draft in an insulated room to move such a massive door as if it were light plywood? Several times, the neighbors set out to find out where such a force was coming from, but the enthusiasm vanished as soon as anyone approached that door. Perhaps it was that awful smell. There was a strange odor wafting from room 19, like some sort of putrefaction. Apparently, the sewage problem in this room was not the responsibility of the Housing and Utilities Department. Or perhaps it was the door itself that was to be avoided. It was unusual. On the corners and in the center of the door were metal rivets, shaped like circles and painted white. Time should have washed away the paint, but it looked like someone was constantly renewing it. There was another reason why the occupants avoided going out to explore. An oppressive sense of dread enveloped a man like a dark shadow. If he took a few steps beyond the threshold of room 19, fear literally paralyzed him. The notion that the door behind his back might slam shut with a loud sound, closing forever, depriving him of his freedom, became so real that no one dared to undertake the ordeal. Thus, we circumvented this ominous room, endeavoring to stay away from it. There was also a staff alkie living in our house, whom everyone called Uncle Joe. He was a good-natured man, but after a drink, he would sometimes get the urge to do something. At one of those times, Uncle Joe decided to put a big barn lock on the door to make sure no one could get in. He even got a welding machine somewhere to reinforce the massive hinges of the door. This task was done exceptionally well. However, he did not have the keys to the lock, but the residents turned a blind eye to that, as no one wanted to deal with what was behind that door. The residents breathed a sigh of relief. It was now possible to go down into the basement without fear. I decided to do the same on one winter Friday evening to enjoy a jar of pickled tomatoes. Having opened the door to the cellar, I began to descend the stairs, having previously switched on the light in the corridor. The flickering bulb threatened to leave me in the dark after a few minutes. Gritting my teeth, I hurried towards my basement. As I passed Dr. 19, I heard something incomprehensible in the distance, as if someone was moving something heavy outside the house. The sound stopped after a moment, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Continuing on my way, I came to my basement. Opening the cellar door with my key, I began searching through the jars, hoping to find something edible. Absorbed in this search, I became disconnected from reality, and it wasn't until a few minutes later that I came back to reality, having never found a single can of tomatoes. I decided to get cucumbers instead. As I was about to leave, I turned around, but then I heard some rustling. No, they weren't just rustles. They were muffled thumps, like something heavy was moving. It was as if the creature had encountered an invisible obstacle that hadn't been there before, and now it was looking for a way to overcome it. I froze in place, holding the jar of pickles, trying not to even breathe. The pounding on the door became more insistent and more frightening. My resolve vanished, and I cursed myself for my slowness. I had to act at once. The first blow should have made me flee from this subterranean burial ground, where hidden what was now striving for freedom, apparently not for the first time. To the blows was added an ominous scraping sound. Something full of rage and desperation was clawing at the iron of the door with its claws. I hoped very much that it would hold, that Uncle Joe had done a good job. The thought finally occupied my mind. After all, if the creature got out, it would no doubt notice the light in the cellar and realize that someone was here. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Something made the creature retreat. Perhaps it realized the obstacle was too strong, or it decided to take a break. But I realized that I wasn't going to get a second chance. Slowly placing the jar on the shelf, I prepared myself to relive the worst moments of my life. Carefully stepping out into the corridor and closing the door behind me, I turned to face the exit. My basement was in the farthest corner of this underground space. To get back upstairs, I had to walk about 5 meters down the corridor, then turn the corner and walk another 20 meters or so to get to the vestibule and up the stairs. It was at this point that the mysterious extra basement was located. The light was faint, falling along the corridor. Several of the bulbs seemed to be burned out already, and the rest were flickering, as if ready to go out at any minute. I began to move cautiously, tiptoeing my way through the first 5 meters, and then stopped to pull myself together. My path further on led to a 20-meter section where the damned extra basement was located. I moved carefully, pressing myself against the wall to make the least amount of noise possible. The first few meters were fairly steady, and I even decided to pick up the pace. The 19th door was only a few meters away, but suddenly a new sound pierced the air, making my knees buckle, and I slid to the floor to keep from falling. It took a few seconds for me to come to my senses, and then, not even looking at the danger, I rushed forward, past that damn door. I rushed up the stairs, left the basement, went back to my flat, grabbed my phone, and went to a friend's house for the night. Now, as I re-examine that terrible moment, it's hard for me to say what frightened me more: the sound of the ground breaking, mixed with the thumping on the concrete, or the hideous hand that crawled out from under the door, covered in a green pus-like substance, with 6 fingers, from which long claws protruded like nails with stumpy caps. Several years passed. In our neighborhood, they decided to erect new buildings, as our house, which was practically in the center of the city, was sentenced to demolition. The residents were relocated to other places, but before the demolition could begin, it was necessary to inspect all the premises, including the basements, according to the norms. This was not an easy task. One had to head down into those dark and gloomy expanses. A group of 5 strong men recalled how long they had delayed the moment to enter the 19th basement. They argued that there was no one there and that there was no point in going there. But under pressure from their superiors, 2 of them were still forced to go into that cellar. Apart from stinking rot and some old junk and strange flesh like scraps, they found nothing. However, according to their stories, they did find a strange tunnel in the wall. There was a cold draft and an unpleasant smell of a burial ground. The tunnel went down at an angle, so they decided to fill it with a special mixture and close it permanently, explaining that it was a design error. Thus, the house was demolished, and the dark secrets of the cellar remained unsolved, covered by the sand of time and erased from the memory of the neighborhood residents. For 2 whole years, I have been working part-time in delivery services. While I am actively studying in my 4th year at college, my life is literally boiling with various things. Although not all employers provide a sufficiently flexible work schedule, so I was always looking for a more convenient option. And so, quite recently, I came across a tempting vacancy announcement for a courier who would deliver at night. In addition, they offered quite generous rewards for such work. Without hesitation, I grabbed the phone and dialed the specified number. As soon as the conversation ended, I had an appointment. The next day, I went to the specified address, and I was met by a two-story building on the edge of the city, which I had never seen before. A smiling guard in a dark uniform, elderly with a bald spot on his head, was already waiting inside. "Where are you going?" he asked happily. "I'm a courier on the night shift, office 207 on the second floor," I replied with a smile from ear to ear. I quickly climbed the stairs to the second floor and entered the office. There, at the table, sat a young guy about 25 years old in a business black suit. He had confidence and an unflappable look on his face. He invited me to sit in the chair opposite. "I remember that you called yesterday about working as a courier," he said completely without emotion, pausing before continuing. "Our conditions are as follows. You will work only at night, deliver certain things to certain places, and receive your salary immediately after each delivery." I nodded in agreement. So began my new, exciting life as a night courier, full of mysterious deliveries and unpredictable situations. Every night was an adventure, and I felt like I was participating in something more than just a delivery service. It was something unique and exciting. This arrangement suited me completely, and immediately after I filled out several documents, Sasha, that was his name, extended his hand to me as a greeting. "My name is Sasha," he introduced himself. We shook hands, and I answered, "Arthur." Suddenly, everything happened so fast that I couldn't even believe my luck. I was hired almost without any questions, but despite the external formality, I was alerted by the fact that the process was taking place so rapidly. Sasha explained that my first shift starts at midnight, and without delay, I should be here in 15 minutes. I arrived at the specified time, even a little in advance, and went into the office. There was a large branded black backpack on the table. "Here is the address to which you have to deliver the goods, and a little instruction," Sasha said, handing me a piece of paper. He also handed me an electronic wristwatch that showed 23:44. "And here is our branded watch," he added. And then Sasha warned me about a rule that could not be broken. "You should never take off your watch until you deliver the goods and come back here," he said seriously. I nodded, understanding the importance of following this rule. "If you take them off, you won't get the money for delivery anymore," Sasha warned. So I went to my first delivery with a sense of responsibility and interest. The black watch on my hand reminded me of the importance of following the rule, and I decided to perform my task in the best possible way. Each step was carefully thought out, and the heart beat in time with the exciting night adventures that were just beginning. I faced a choice, standing in front of the house and wondering how I could get to the specified address. When I opened the mobile application with maps, I found that it does not show this place. Unusual, I thought, because usually all the addresses can be found on maps. But I decided to act according to the instructions on the piece of paper that I was given. There I saw only one word, meat. Meat, I thought, because I myself would not refuse a delicious piece right now. When I got to the place, I saw a strange 5-story building on a vacant lot. There were no other houses nearby, and my terrible night delivery turned out to be inside this mysterious building with an unusual layout. Going up to the second floor, I continued my search for apartment number 155. The corridor branched and turned, and I almost got lost. Finally, I found a sign with an image of a staircase and followed it. Arriving at the apartment, I knocked on the door and waited impatiently for an answer. The door opened, and a bulky man in a white t-shirt and grey shorts stood in front of me. I greeted him, and he silently motioned me to come in. Going inside, I noticed that there were two other equally heavy men sitting in the room. One of them showed me a table. Without hesitation, I opened my backpack and put a black bag of meat on the table. And then I saw their teeth sharp and numerous, like those of predators. A feeling of fear shackled me, and I realized that I just didn't get to the usual delivery. The three men began to bite off the meat and eat it, like predators on the hunt. I cautiously stood by and realized that I was in a completely unusual situation. Questions were crowding in my head, but I didn't know what to do. After the men finished their dinner, I hurried to leave this apartment and this mysterious world, afraid to attract unnecessary problems. At that moment, unexpectedly, one of the men took a purse out of his pocket and handed me money with a smile from the sharp rows of teeth. My hands were shaking as I took the money in the backpack and then quietly left the room. To avoid being followed, I quickly pulled on my sneakers and left the apartment, closing the door behind me. In a panic, I hurriedly looked for a way out, but there were no signs pointing to the exit, and I got confused in these endless corridors. When I turned the corner, I met another bulky man in a butcher's apron with sharp teeth. He was dragging a large bag with a human hand and fingers sticking out of it. When he saw me, he smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Terrified, I ran away from him, fearing that I would get into a dead end and these strange creatures, which I could not call people, would get me. Luck smiled when I found the stairs to the first floor and ran outside. Jumping up on my bike, I quickly left the place, drenched in cold sweat. Amid the confusion, I got to the house where I worked, and with great relief turned to Sasha, who was responsible for the delivery of goods. I asked him about the creatures I was delivering meat to, but he calmly replied that I'd already been paid for the work I had done. After receiving my half of the payment, I handed over the watch to him and left, leaving many unanswered questions. Stunned by what was happening, I returned home and fell on the bed, just wanting to forget about everything and fall asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I left the house, but instead of going to college, I decided to go to the very house where I encountered mysterious creatures last night. My curiosity overcame reason, and I intended to follow them from afar to find out who they were. However, when I arrived at the vacant lot where the house stood, I found that it was no longer there. "Whatever," I muttered, realizing that the investigation had either erased all traces or something else had happened. Then I decided to go back to the bike and go to where I had spent the previous night, running through endless corridors and escaping from strange creatures. But the ground and grass were now in normal condition, and there were no buildings on the horizon, as if everything that happened yesterday was some kind of strange dream. Mixed feelings and doubts overwhelmed me. On the one hand, working as a deliveryman for creepy creatures seemed scary and dangerous. On the other hand, the huge amount of money I received for this was an undoubted advantage. As a result, I decided to spend the day thinking and relaxing a little to make sense of what had happened. Taking a wad of money with me, I bought myself a couple of clothes, ate at a restaurant, and bought a new phone. The next night, I took the order from Sasha again. On the table were the same black watch and backpack, as well as a sheet of paper with instructions. This time, there was nothing about strange creatures in the instructions. In the column goods, it was indicated kerosene. Arriving at the address, I found an ordinary 9-story building. There were normal streets around, and everything seemed normal. I went into the entrance, took the elevator, and went to the specified floor. But when the elevator doors opened, I saw only the entrance illuminated by a faint yellowish light, and strange sounds came from it, as if someone was walking unnaturally, taking breaks between steps. Fear and bewilderment seized me, and I stood on the threshold, doubting what to do next. Delivering kerosene in such a place looked no less strange than delivering meat to those mysterious creatures. But the money tempted me to continue. Opening the door, I saw a woman with a pleasant appearance, but her eyes were unusually bright yellow. "Delivery," I said, and pointed to the backpack that I took off my shoulder. The woman carefully looked at the backpack, then at me, and in sudden movements, took out a wad of money from her pocket. She held out her hand with the money in front of her and smiled, pausing for a moment. Then she quickly grabbed a canister of kerosene from my backpack and retired to the apartment, closing the door behind her. I called the elevator and went down. After that, I returned to Sasha, gave him his share, and said that I was ready to work tomorrow. Despite the strange circumstances of the work, I received good money, which suited me. I spent the day with pleasure, spending some of the money on pleasant purchases. The next night, I came back to work. Sasha said I was going to work too early. In the office, he showed me a 6-digit code on the back of the watch, which I had to memorize. Sasha warned me not to take the watch off my hand and handed me a silver chain that I had to wear for safety. Then I went to make another delivery. I was told that I had to go through one door of the entrance, but I assumed that she would no longer be there during the day. I looked at the product entry in the instructions and smiled. It's just paper. Entering the entrance, I walked to the elevator, but noticed a strange door that seemed completely new and did not correspond to the surrounding environment. Deciding to check, I went inside and found myself in a hospital corridor with bright lighting. There were doors along the corridor with a length of about 50-60 meters, and I went to one of them. There were doorways on the sides of the corridor, one of which I looked into as I passed by. There, I saw some unpleasant creatures devouring a human corpse. When they heard my footsteps, they turned and noticed me, but stopped, sniffing and wincing, and did not approach me. I continued walking down the corridor without taking my eyes off them. They followed me, but at some distance. When I got to the door at the end of the corridor, I went inside and closed the door behind me. It turned out to be a small room where a man in a white coat and glasses, about 30 years old, was sitting. There were bookcases on the wall, and there was another door in the room. The man was writing something on a piece of paper, and there was a pile of sheets on the table, which was already running out. Approaching him, I said, "Delivery." He continued to write, waved his hand so that I put the money on the table, pointing to the ending pile of sheets. Then, with the same hand, he took out a wad of money and put it on the table without stopping writing. Leaving the room, I realized that this strange guy, who paid a lot of money for paper, was just engaged in meaningless scribbles on sheets. It became clear to me that he was not going to share information about the creatures or about the place where he was. It was probably just routine for him, and he didn't want any conversations. Getting into the car, I thought about the watch I was wearing on my hand, and how certain ciphers and codes set by Sasha allow me to be transported to other worlds. It became clear to me that the clock is most likely the key to getting to these strange places. By setting the code correctly, you can get into different worlds and discover something unimaginable. Perhaps that is why Sasha demanded that I do not remove the watch from my hand in order to avoid undesirable consequences. A couple of days after the paper was delivered, I got an unpleasant call from an unenviable acquaintance to whom I owed a lot of money. By the way, he was one of the main reasons why I was looking for a job at all. In this conversation, he said that if I did not repay the debt in a week, he would take extreme measures. Then I already had enough money to repay the debt, and I decided to go for a trick. Having said that I received an inheritance, I promised him to return the money even the next day. The caller was surprised, but agreed and said he would wait. I had a not very honest but brilliant idea. Knowing the code from the door in the entrance, behind which the creepy creatures lived, I invited a friend to meet at this house early in the morning. Arriving at the place, I saw him and two other strong men, whom he took for protection. He asked me with hostility, "Where is the money, brother?" But I answered falsely, "I told you I moved. Let's go to my house now, and I'll give it to you." With caution, I led him to the entrance. I went first, and they followed me. "What is this strange story?" asked my friend, who came with me into the dark entrance. "Do you live here?" "Next," I replied, and pointed to a doorway in the wall. We went there, and my friends were the first to go inside. But before they could say anything, they were attacked by strange creatures, and everything happened very quickly. I moved away from them to a safe distance, leaving these creatures to have dinner on my unfortunate acquaintances. I had a silver necklace around my neck, which I had thoughtfully bought a little earlier. Thanks to this necklace, no one touched me, and I was able to safely leave there. Later that night, I went to Sasha's to take a new order. If anything, I'll say that I just forgot to take off the watch that I didn't use. However, when I entered the house, I found a complete mess inside and a guard lying dead with a bullet in his head. Going up to the second floor, I found Sasha's corpse. His body was mutilated, and I realized that he was tortured to find something valuable, probably what was on my hand, namely a watch. When I last looked at the scattered things, I found several files with ciphers for the clock, which indicate how the passage to another world opens. This information was enough, and I quickly left this place so that no one would find me. Now, guided by all the available information, I'm going to travel the worlds on my own and deliver things there that are very rare. So I was selling unwanted items for a lot of money. By the way, in most of the worlds to which I opened passages on my own, some junk is also used as money. Therefore, I have to work with only a small part of them. The money there is the same as mine after all. Such worlds are not so easy to find. But I already have the necessary list of proven worlds, so I'm lucky, and I can safely sell things in worlds I already know, and at the same time, look for new places to trade. With each trip, I've seen a lot of strange places, and who knows how many I still have to see. After all, there are still many unexplored worlds ahead, full of mysteries and secrets that I'm looking forward to revealing. I am 18 years old, and I am a student living away from my parents' home. I want to tell you a story that happened this summer. When I remember it, I feel horror, and a strange chill runs down my spine. The events took place in the summer, in July, when the heat had not yet receded, but by evening, it was pleasantly cool outside. The difference in atmosphere between daytime and evening was palpable. That evening, I was chatting with a friend on a social networking site, watching various YouTube videos. There were freshly made sandwiches nearby, and my private messages were overflowing with messages from my friend. A video of my favorite blogger was playing on the screen. Something was missing to create the perfect atmosphere, and it was warm tea. Deciding it wasn't hard to fix that, I alerted my friends and headed to the kitchen. There, I put a kettle of water on the cooker to boil the water. While it heated up, I stared out the window. It was getting dark outside, and it was quiet all around. After a while, the kettle let me know that the water was boiling. I made some tea, put a few lumps of sugar in a cup, and left it on the windowsill to cool down. Not wanting to go into the stuffy room, I decided to wait for the drink to cool, and in the meantime, pay attention to the scenery outside the window, the streets of the city devoid of people. A minute or two passed, and a strange silhouette appeared on the horizon. A tall man of strange appearance, about 2 meters tall, maybe even taller. His head was shaved naked, wearing a white shirt with patches of red paint on the collar. His wide old belt and wide trousers added to the mystique. He walked slowly, whistling some strange tune, and suddenly slowed down, staring out the first floor window. By the way, I live on the first floor, but the strange man stopped, as if frozen, and began to stare intently at the windows. I felt uneasy in my soul. There was too much mystery in this moment. What normal person would think of looking into other people's windows at night? Realizing that I didn't want to look at it for long, I decided to get some more hot tea and hurriedly headed to my room. I had already accumulated more than 20 messages in my private messages, and I promptly shared with my friend what had happened to this strange man. However, he did not believe my story and asked me to at least take a picture of the stranger. Of course, I refused, finding excuses, although, truth be told, I just didn't want to run into him again. The topic quickly faded into the shadows of the heated debate we were having, discussing the latest news. It had long since fallen into total darkness outside. The clock was showing 42 minutes past the first hour, but I had no desire to step outside the world of the internet. My friend, who had just warned me of his intentions to take a shower and then go to sleep, had decided to do the same, because tomorrow he was expected to rise early and leave for work issues. Of course, sitting alone seemed increasingly tedious, but as sleep was not coming, I made the decision to take another look at the world of YouTube videos. Perhaps a well-deserved nap would come after that, but just as I started watching the blogger's 15-minute-long video, a message from a friend came to me. "Dude, you won't believe what I just saw." Turned on the water in the bathtub, decided to wait for it to fill up. It was hot, so I opened the window, looked outside, and there, a man, ordinary looking, but there was something strange about him. I can't even say exactly what it was. He was walking, humming some song, and then suddenly, he stopped near my house. He stared at the windows of the ground floor, just staring for about 5 minutes. Then he looked at the first floor. I thought maybe he was waiting for someone. And then he looked through my windows, right at me. That's when my drink cup even froze in my hand, and a smirk appeared on his face. And it wasn't just a smile, it was something incredibly creepy. I can't even tell you how scared I was. And suddenly, he made some inhuman sound, and his face maybe even turned black, though that could have been my imagination. Then I felt something wet under my feet. It turned out the bathtub had overflowed. I went to turn off the water, and then I went back to the kitchen and he was gone. "Maybe I just imagined it," I replied. "Yes, I think I mentioned him to you, but you didn't want to believe it. If you drank less, your imagination wouldn't run so wild. Although, I agree, he did seem strange, but we should look at the world objectively. Perhaps this husband just decided to go for a walk. Maybe he was intoxicated, and therefore looked into other people's windows. Who knows, maybe he was looking for someone to shelter him." Wait, there's a knock on the door. My friend texted me, then added, "Weird, who could possibly come at this hour?" Well, okay, I'll go open it. I'll text you right after, and I'm going to go take a bath after all. I continued watching the video, ignoring the fact that 40 minutes had passed since his last message. It didn't bother me much, I thought. Maybe the neighbors had dropped by, because he'd overflowed the bathtub while he was staring at the man. It's quite possible he just forgot to sign off and left. I didn't see anything strange about it at the time, and I continued to spend time on the internet. A couple of hours later, I went to bed because I had to get up early for school the next day. The next day flew by pretty quickly. I wanted to go to my friend's house, who, by the way, lives opposite my house. But then I remembered that he was away because of work, so he probably wouldn't be home. I didn't call him either, so as not to bother him. By evening, he was still not on social media, even though he was supposed to be back no later than 5 p.m. To be honest, I started to feel some anxiety, but quickly calmed myself down with the thought that he decided to visit his girlfriend or something like that. Around 11:53 p.m., I went to the kitchen. The thirst was unbearable. He poured himself some cool water from a carafe and started drinking, looking out the window. Suddenly, the same man appeared in the street again. He was dressed the same as last time, singing the same strange tune. Again, he stopped outside my house and started looking through the ground floor windows with the same frozen face. He looked straight into my eyes, and a smirk full of malevolence appeared on his face. I was overcome with such a terrible jolt that I almost choked on my water. Then his mouth opened so wide that he seemed to be trying to tear the world apart with his scream. That scream, my God, I'd never heard anything so horrible. At this moment, it seemed to me that his face was becoming even darker, as if absorbing the light. His skin even sagged a lot, as if it couldn't stay on his skull. The glass fell out of my hands, and I ran to my room, barely containing my tremors. At this point, it must have been about 15 minutes. I could neither recover nor calm down. I had already decided to go to bed when suddenly there was a hard and loud knocking on the door. The sound was so strong that it sounded like someone on the other side of the door was trying to break it down. I sat in complete paralysis, not daring to even move. The knocking continued for at least half an hour, and I could do nothing but sit and wait. Then suddenly, it went quiet. I passed out and did not come to my senses until 1 p.m. the next day. It wasn't clear to me what had happened, but what I didn't remember was probably for the best. After a few days, the memories began to fade from my memory, and I decided to put it down to the fact that it was just fatigue and an illusion caused by overexertion. That's what I thought until I received the terrible news of my friend's death. His terrible death, which I refused to believe. He was found hanging in the kitchen, right in front of the window. His head was shaved bald, as if the barber had done his job perfectly. On the collar of his shirt, which he was going to wear to work, there were traces of blood from his slit throat. My friend's mother told me about it because we were close enough. From the moment I learnt of his death, it became clear to me who was behind it all. Whether he was a maniac or some otherworldly force that took the form of a human being, I didn't know. But since then, I have never looked out the window at night again, and I always cover them with curtains. That experience taught me that darkness can hide terrible secrets that are better not to know.